Hello everyone, welcome to the DigiDev channel. In this video we are going to learn all about C# in just 1 hour. So we start by creating a new project. Then we learn how we can get an input from a user. After that we dive into variables, what types do they have. Then we'll learn about type conversion. For example, how we can convert a number to a text. Then we'll learn about conditionals, if statement, else statement, if-else statement, and switch cases. After that, we go over arrays and learn how we can create arrays and what types do they have. Then we dive into more advanced stuff like lists and how we can debug our projects. Then we'll learn about loops, how we can execute a code multiple times. After that, we'll learn about methods, how we can structure our projects. And at last, we learn about classes and objects, which we will put our most time inside the classes and objects section, because it's the topic that most of the beginners will stuck to and can't understand it. So I tried a bunch of animations, not too good, but it will help you understand faster and better. And throughout the course, I try to explain to you as easy and fast as I can. So just go grab your coffee and let's have a very productive 1 hour. So the first thing that I want you to do is to go download and install Visual Studio Community, which is a free version of Visual Studio. By the way, Visual Studio is the place that we are going to write our codes and run our programs. After that, I want you to download and install the latest version of .NET, and then we are good to go. After you've downloaded and installed Visual Studio, just open it and let's create a new project. So here you can see many kinds of projects that we can create. They are for different platforms and different project types that we can use. For the purpose of this tutorial, we are going to use the most simple one, which is a console app. Although we are going to use many kind of other project types in the future. So just click on next and set a project name for our project. I will just call it Fast C#. Just click on next, and here you can select the version of .NET that you are using. I'm using .NET 6, but the latest version of .NET right now is .NET 7. So you can use .NET 7. There is absolutely no difference. And hit create. And here you can see the project that been created. So in here we have multiple sections. One of them is Solution Explorer, which all of our files going to be stored inside Solution Explorer inside here. As you can see, here is the place that our files will be opened. Here we have a program.cs, which is this file. And the program.cs is the main file that we are going to write all of our code inside of it. So if I close it, I can reopen it just by double clicking on the program.cs over here. The program that we have created right now is the most simple program you can get, which is called console app. So the end result when we are using a console project is a console window. Here is the play button for our application. If I click on it, our application would be executed. There is no other window besides this console window, and any code that we write, the result will be shown inside this console window. And it does not have a graphical interface. Alright, now let's go back to the code and let's see what these 2 lines of code means. So first let me tell you that anything that we want to write inside our application must have a meaning to the C#. And here, for example, here in this code, you can see it's written console.writeLine, and inside parentheses it says hello world. This code will print hello world inside our console application. As I've told you, our application is a console type application. So when we type console, we can have access to many attributes of the console that are available to us. For example, the background color of the console, or we can write a line inside a console as it has been done here. The other line that we have here is a comment. It's not a code, but a comment that will not be executed when we are executing our application. It's just to help the other people that will come and read our code. Or maybe for ourselves, we can write a memo so we can check this code out later. So we don't need this line right now, and I will remove it. And since this line has been written from the project template, let's remove this line as well and write it again ourselves. So the thing that we want to do, we want to print a hello world text inside our console. Now what we need to do is first access our console by typing console. As you can see here, there is a window that when I'm typing something, it will suggest the similar keywords that the Visual Studio and C# recognize, and we can use them to write our programs. Here we just want to access the console. Now that we have our console, we want to change or use some of its attributes. And in order to access the attributes of the console, we can use a dot. And here are all of the attributes of the console. The attribute that we want to access is either write or write line. I will tell you the difference after we wrote the code. Let's just use the write command for now. And to tell it what we want to write inside the console, we need to open up and close two parentheses. So inside the parentheses, we need to put our text inside double quotations in order for C# to know that the text is not an executable code. So just set a double quotation, and inside our double quote we can write anything we want. So now that we write our line of code, we need to tell C# that the line of code has been ended, and we can do that by typing a semicolon. Now if we run our application, you can see the hello world has been written inside our console app. So now for the difference for console.write and console.writeLine. Let's just copy the console.write again and run our application. Here you can see we have hello world and hello world. There is no space, there is no other line between these two. And that's because we are using console.write. If we use console.writeLine, the next text that is going to be written inside our console will be written in another line. As you can see here, the second hello world is in the next line. So the next command that we want to learn is console.readLine. With console.readLine, we can get an input from the user. In C#, the codes will be running from top to bottom. The console.readLine will stop the application, and it will wait for the user to input something. And after that, the application will continue to do whatever it was doing. As you can see, my application hasn't printed hello world yet, and it is waiting for me to input some data. Let's just say test. As you can see, after I inputted some data and pressed enter, the application continued running as it was doing before. So now how can we use this data? The way that we can use this data is by using it directly inside one of the other commands, for example console.write. One of the ways is to use it directly inside one of the commands. For example, when we are using console.write, we don't want to use a piece of text. We want to use another command, which is for example console.readLine, which will give us some data back and we can print it out. Let's remove the semicolon, and now let's run the application. Here you can see our first hello world is printed out, and after we input something, and when I press enter, as you can see, it will get the data and print it out again. So the other way to store and manipulate this data inputted by the user is by using variables. And in the next lecture, I will tell you all about variables. So variables can be seen as a storage box that we can store some data into it. In programming, if we have some kind of data, it could be a piece of text or it could be a number, and it is going to be used multiple times throughout our application, we will store it into a variable. The benefits of the variable is that if we use a number in multiple places in our codes and we decide to change it, we don't need to change it multiple times throughout our code. For example, if we have a x equal 10 variable, so x here is our variable, we can use x inside anywhere of our code. And if we suddenly want the x to be 12, if we just change the value up here, all of the other places that we used our variable will be changed to 12. And also we can use equation on our variable. So we can add numbers, subtract numbers, and anything else. So now that we know how important variables are, you need to know that variables come within multiple types. If we have a piece of text that we want to store, for example, hello world, This text is of type of string. So how can we create a variable out of this? Since texts are of type string, we can here say string my text equal to that value and then a semicolon to end it. So here we have a variable called my text. My text is the name of the variable, and here is the type of the variable, which is a string, and here is the value that we are going to store inside our variable. Now we can use my text instead of x, and if I run our application, here you can see hello world has been written inside our console. And there are also other types of variables that we can create. Most used ones are string, integers for simple numbers. Let's call this variable a and set the value of 1 to it. Now let's create another variable. It's of type double. Let's name it d and set it equal to 5.3. So the difference between double and integer is that double can take decimal numbers. And we also have float. Let's call it f and set it equal to 5.3 as well. And here you can see it is giving us an error. Float is very similar to the double. It can also contain decimal values. The difference is that float consumes less memory than double. And the double can store a very larger number than float. So in order to differentiate between float and double, we should add an f to end of our value so that Csharp knows that this value is of type float and it is not double. The last type of variable that I wanted to tell you is type boolean. Let's call it b and set it equal to true. The boolean value can either contain true or false, just like a light switch. It could be either on or it could be either off. Now that we learned about variables, if you want to get a value from the user and store it into our variable, it can simply be done by creating a variable of type string. Let's call it user input, and let's assign it a value of console.readline. The reason that we are using a string type variable is because the console.readline will always return a string value as the user input, so we cannot assign any other type to it. For creating a variable, we can also use something called var. When we create a variable of type var, let's call it v and set it equal to 1 for example. We do not need to assign the type to it. A var variable will decide on its own that what type it is. So if we assign a simple number, it will be integer, and if we assign a piece of text, it will be of type string. But I suggest you that you use a type, because firstly, reading it for other people would be very easier. And another reason is that because you are a beginner, it will root into your memory how the values work. If you want to help me create more videos like this, you can consider subscribing and liking this video. Now we want to learn how to convert the types of our variables. Let's say that we are just having a user input inside our application and we want to print it out. But the input that we're going to get from the user is a number, and we want to use some equations on that number and then print it out. So in order to do that, we need to convert the string type user input to an integer. And it can be simply done by using the command convert. Just like a console command that we have used to access our console attributes, we can use convert to convert types of variables to each other. So here we have all the types that we can convert to. We want to convert the user input to integer 32 bits. There are other integers like 64 bits or 16 bits, and it is just the size that the integer will consume from your memory. And the default integer will always be 32 bits. So let's say convert to int32, open up and close parentheses, and inside the parentheses we're going to put the value that we are going to convert, which in our case is user input, and we end it with a semicolon. Now what this piece of code does, it will not change the string variable user input to an integer type variable. It will just convert the value that is stored inside user input, and it will return the value to us. So we need to store this returned value to another variable so we can use it. And we simply can here create another variable, let's say int, let's just call it a, and we will set the value to the result that it is returning to us. Now since it is an integer, we can add a number to it. And let's do that by saying a is equal to a plus 10. The reason that we are writing it like this is because any equation, for example a plus 10, will return a value just like the code convert that we used up here. And we need to store it inside something else. But since we are not going to use the previous value stored inside a and we don't care about it, we can just say store the value inside the same variable. And then we can say console.writeLine a. Now if I run the application and if I input 5, press enter, here you can see it will add 10 numbers to it and it is returning us 15. Conditions are essential for every program. So here let's say the input is the age of the user. We want to say if the age is more than 18, we want the user to be able to access for example, the website or the program. So we can have conditions in many ways. One of them is the if keyword. So say if, in parentheses we set the condition. For example, we say if the age is more than 18. That's the condition. Now what's going to happen is inside these two curly brackets. So we want to say if the age is more than 18, just console.write you have access to the website. And if you're wondering how I move the line up, it's a combination of pressing Alt and the arrow keys. Something else that we can use is the combination of pressing Ctrl, K, and then D. So I hold the Ctrl, pressed K, and then press D while holding the Ctrl. And it is magically cleans up our code. So now we want to have another condition which is connected to this condition. So we have if age was more than 18. Now we want to say if the age was less than 10, for example. There is another keyword which is else keyword, and we attach an if to it. So else if the age was less than 10, here is what you're going to do. I want to copy this and say you are less than 10. So now we have two connected conditions. So if the age was more than 18, do this, and else if the age was less than 10, do this. So we want to have another path as well. So if all of our conditions was not true, here is what you're going to do. So we can do that by the else keyword. So the else keyword does not have parentheses, it just have the curly brackets. So if this condition was not true, and this condition was not true, and any other condition that we have was not true, the else will be triggered. Alright, so let's copy the console.writeLine here and say this is the else. Now let's run our application. Here we input an age, for example 15, and it says this is the else. Let's do it one more time. So here I press 20 and it says you have access to the website. This is one way that we can use conditions, and there is another way which is called switch case. Switch case is very simple. Here we will just say switch, and here in the parentheses we need to set the variable that we are going to apply conditions to it. In our case it is age, and here we will open and close two curly brackets, and here we can have multiple cases. So we say in case it was more than 18, here is what you're gonna do. We do not open up and close curly brackets. We will set the boundaries of the condition to a breakpoint. So here is what's gonna happen. It will go into the switch, and we want to switch on the age. If it was more than 18, do this line of code and then break the condition and get out of the switch. So let's test it out. We want to say console.writeLine more than 18. So here is another case. We want to say if it was less than 10, and now we want to say if it was anything else, like the else condition that we had for if and if else. And to do that, we can just say default. This is the exact thing that we had for if and if else, but here we are using cases, and we are using default for when all of the conditions are not met. Let's change this to default. Let me run the application. 20, it is more than 18. 15, it is default. And 4 is less than 18. Arrays are just like variables, but one of the difference between variables and arrays is that we can store multiple values inside arrays, but inside variables we can only store one value. Arrays are mostly used when we have so much data. For example, when we want to get all of the products of our websites, or we want to categorize our products in different categories. Now let's create an array. So the structure is very much like the variable. Let's just say string names is going to be equal to Sarah. Now, in order to turn this into an array, and let's say I want to add 2 more names, all we need to do is to add 2 square brackets right after our type, and for the value we need to put them inside 2 curly brackets. So now I can separate the values with comma and add another value. Now that's our array of names. Now for displaying the data, we just say console.writeLine, and to get the data from our array we just need to call the names. And the difference between using an array and using a variable is that we need to specify which index of our variable we are going to get. We just need to add the square brackets, and inside the square brackets we need to put the index of our value. So in collective types like arrays and lists, the starting point of our indexing will start from 0. So the first value will index 0, the second one will index 1, and it goes on. So in order to get the second value, which is Mehdi, we need to set the value of 1 inside our names. And now let's run the application. You can see it is printing out Mehdi inside our console. We can also change the values of our array, and it can be possible by saying names, specify the index, for example index 1, and I can set it equal to name, which is the variable that we have up here. And again, if I run the application, here you can see the printed name would be Ali, because we are replacing it with the previous value inside our array. Now let's say we want to know how many items we have inside our array. We can access that easily by saying names dot, and we have a property called length. And the name.length will return us an integer that we can store it inside any integer, which I'm going to say number going to be equal to names.length. And here we can just print out number. So if I run the application again, here you can see we have 2 elements. Just like arrays, lists are a storage for our data that we can store multiple data inside one place. Lists are like an upgraded version of arrays. So we have much more features like adding the data after we created a list, or removing the data, and some other features that we are going to use inside this video. Now, in order to create a list, we are going to say list, and here we are going to specify the type of the list that we're going to create. I'm going to have a list of integers, so I will write down int, and here the name of the list, which I'm going to set to numbers, and we need to set the list to a new list. This is the structure of list. We need to set our list to a new list of integers because Csharp needs to initialize the list that we have, and this is the way it will do it. So now I can add my values by simply saying numbers.add, and here I can put the value. And I can add values anytime that I want inside my program. So let's have the value of 0, let's have 2, 5, 23, and 12. We can also remove the data by saying numbers.remove. Here I can put the value that I want to remove. This is the value, not the index of our value. So here I can say 4, and if there is a value of 4 inside my list, it will remove it for me. And if we don't have the value of 4, it will move on to the rest of the code. So we can also have numbers.contain, which will check if there is a specific number inside our list. And if it is, it will return us a Boolean type result. So we need to store that result into something, which we can store it inside a Boolean operator, of course. So let's say bool, let's call it check, and set it equal to numbers.contains. So if there is a number 1 inside our numbers, it will return us true, and if there isn't, it will return false. Alright, beside remove, we do have something else that I want to tell you, which is remove at. So let's say numbers.remove at, and instead of removing a certain number, I want to remove a certain index. So let's say remove at 0, and it will remove the index 0 for us. We do also have a sorting function, which is numbers.sort, and it doesn't matter the values inside our list is integer or in a string. It will sort it for us based on the value, and if it is a string, it will sort it from A to Z. We also can add a value to a certain index. Let's say numbers.insert, and by number.insert we need to add 2 values. The first value is going to be the index that we are going to put our value. So let's say index 0, and the second one is the actual value that we are going to put in that index. Let's say number 4, and add a semicolon at the end. So now we want to test our application. So I'm not going to print all of our numbers each time we are doing a function and show you the results that the function are providing for us. Instead, what I'm going to do, I'm going to put a breakpoint at here. Breakpoints are a very great way for debugging our application. So if you wrote a code that is not giving you any error, but the result that is giving you is different from what you expected, you can use debugging and you can use breakpoint to solve that problem. What breakpoint does, because Csharp is running the codes from top to bottom, when the program reaches the breakpoint, it will stop the program and it will come into the code, and we can watch the code running in real time and watch the values that the our variables holding at real time. And it is a very powerful feature that we have access to. So simply in this line I can add a breakpoint anywhere in my code that I want. And simply by running the application, alright, so it added all the numbers and now hit the breakpoint. If I hover on numbers, doesn't matter where it is, if I hover on numbers, here you can see it's a count 5, which means that there is 5 values inside our numbers. And here you can see the index, and here you can see the values that are inside our numbers. So it hasn't been sorted yet because we are on the line of the sort and it hasn't run it yet. One of them is to press continue, and it will get out of the breakpoint, get out of the debugging, and just continue the application until it hit another breakpoint, which we don't have. Or I can press on the step over. Here is a button called the step over, and if I press on it, it will go to the next line. As I told you, Csharp is running our application line by line from top to bottom, and by pressing a step over, I'm telling it that go to the next line. Alright, now that we have moved to the next line, if I hover on the numbers again, you can see our numbers are sorted because the numbers.sort has been executed. So the next line is inserting value of 4 inside index 0. So let's step over and watch numbers. Alright, here you can see the number 4 in index 0, and you can see our count has increased. Now let's remove 4 that we just added, and if I hover again, you can see the number 4 has been removed. And let's remove at 0, and you can see the index 0 has been removed as well. So now that we have reached the end of the line, so it is the last line, and it hasn't run the code yet, and if I step over, the application will be closed. So let's test it. It is because there is no other line of code that it jumps into. It will run the code and then close the application. Because this is a console application, and the console applications will be closed automatically if there is nothing for them to do. So we can add a console.read line, which is going to read a line or wait for the user to input a key. So the application won't be closed because it is waiting for the user to input something. And let me just move the breakpoint to the boolean that we have, because we want to check that. Here you can see it will hit the breakpoint, and if I step over, the check going to be false because we don't have a number 1 inside of it. Well, as the name suggests, loops will give us the ability to run a bunch of code multiple times inside our applications. For example, let's say I want to print out the numbers from 1 to 100. Or let's say I'm going to go through my list and find any number that is bigger than 10 and remove it. Now let's create a loop. So the first way of creating a loop is by a for loop. By the way, we have a bunch of ways to create a loop. For loop is one of them. So the structure of for loop is very simple. Just like if, we say for, and we open up parentheses, and then we open up curly brackets. Inside the curly brackets, we want to put the codes that we want to be inside the loop. So for loops have their own kind of structures, and it contains 3 parts. The first part is to define a variable. So let's say we have an int, and let's call it I, set it equal to 0. So this is the first part of a for loop. The second part, which is going to be separated from the first part by using a semicolon, is our condition. For our condition, I'm going to say until I is less than 100. Now let's close the second part and write the third part. What I wanted to do is to say I plus plus. The plus plus means that add one number to the I. It's something that we can use anywhere inside our code. So when I say I plus plus, I mean add one number to the I. I can also say I plus equal to 1. It means the same. It means add one number to the I. Or I can say I is equal to I plus 1. And that's the same as well. But it's cleaner to say I plus plus. And let's remove I equal to I plus plus. Alright, so now what I want to do inside our for loop is to write down our I. So I'll say console.writeLine, and inside the parentheses I'm gonna say I. And if I run the application, alright, here you can see we have the numbers from 0 to 99 because the I is equal to 0, and we said until I is less than 100. If we want 100 to be counted, so the 100 itself be inside our loop, we need to say if it's less than or equal to. So if it was equal to 100, also run the for loop for us. And if I want it to be from 1 to 100, I just need to set the I to 1, and let's run it again. And here is from 1 to 100. Now that's the structure for a for loop, and we have another kind of loop, which is a while loop. A while loop, well, the structure is basically kind of like if. And we say while, here is the condition, and here is the curly brackets that we are going to put our code inside. So the while loop is a little bit different from a for loop. The difference is that we cannot have an integer of I, or there isn't any structure inside our while loop, and there is just the condition. So if you want to have a counter like our for loop, we need to create a variable for it. So let's say I want an integer of counter, and I want to set it to 1. Let's just create the exact same thing that we created for the for loop. And here I'm going to say until the counter is less than or equal to 100, run the while loop. And the third part, which is I plus plus, I'm going to put it inside the loop. And normally we set this as the last code inside our while loop. So what is going to happen is that we are going to run all of our code, add 1 to the counter, and run the while loop again. So the only piece of code that we want, as the Visual Studio suggests, is console.writeLine counter. So let's just comment out the for loop and run the application again. Here you can see the same result that we had for the for loop. Now the last way of looping that I'm going to show you is called for each. Basically for each is just used for types like list and arrays, which we have a collection of data. And as the name suggests, it will loop through each of our values. So for each of our values, it will run a loop. For example, let's say we want to have a print of our list. The syntax is very simple. I'm just going to say for each, 2 parentheses and 2 curly brackets. Then inside our parentheses, we just need to specify a variable of type of our list. So our list here is integer, so I need to specify a variable of type integer, which will indicate the current element that it is processing. So I'm going to say int number, and here I'll just say in numbers. So I don't think that it needs much explanation. Besides that, the name doesn't matter. I can put I in here or any name that I want. And let's just say console.writeLine number. Now, if I run my application, here you can see our list has been printed out. And you can do any other operation on the list if you want. But something that you should consider is that you cannot remove the data from inside of for each. And the reason for that is, for example, our numbers is 5 element, and when we remove an element, it will become 4 element, and it will mess up the counting for our for each. And the way that we can solve this problem is by using a normal for, or we can use a while loop as well. And the way that we can fix it is by counting the values downwards. So when we're counting the values backwards, let's say we start with element 5, and the program will say, okay, 12, which is element 5, at index 4 is more than 10, it will remove it. Here we have checked element number 4, and the element and the problem that we had with indexing will not occur anymore. For doing that, what I want to do is to say the I is going to be the number of elements that we have in numbers. And a way to do that is by saying numbers.count. So numbers.count will give us the number of elements that we have inside our list. And we're going to say unless I is more than equal than 0, what I want you to do is to minus the I. So minus just like plus will subtract one value from our variable. But the problem here is that the numbers.count will give us the number of elements that we have inside our list, and the number of elements is 5 here. But the indexing will start from 0, so we actually don't need the exact number 5 from our numbers.count. So the last number, we are not going to use it. So I'm going to just say numbers.count minus 1. And now it will start from one number less than the actual count of elements that we have, because the indexing is going to be a start from 4. Now for removing the data, I'm just going to say numbers.remove at, and I'm going to remove the index that the value exists in there. And the last thing is to put our condition, because now it is removing all of the numbers. So our condition is to say if the numbers I is more than 10, you can remove the number. So because our code inside our if is just one line, I don't need the curly brackets. So the curly brackets will be used just when we are going to have more than one line inside our if. You can use it or skip using it when you have only one line. And here you can see all of our numbers that are more than 10 have been removed from our list, and we didn't occur any problem inside our loop. Now do not worry if it is getting a bit complex and if you don't understand some things. You're gonna learn very much more when you visually see the things in action inside the projects. Alright, now let's talk about functions and methods. So let me tell you right at the start, functions and methods are the same. There is basically no difference in the structure inside methods and functions. So you're gonna hear me saying functions sometimes and saying methods sometimes, but don't get confused, they are the same thing. The only difference is where it is going to be used, which is if it is used inside of a class, which I'm gonna tell you about classes in the next episode. If it is used inside of a class, it is going to be a method, and if it is used outside of a class, it is going to be a function. Methods are just like variables, but instead of values, we will store a piece of code inside of them. And whenever we call the name of our function, the code inside of that function will be executed. And it will make our application very much cleaner and our lives very much easier. For example, let's say we have a function that is going to send some data to our server, and we need to implement that functionality multiple places inside our application. So if this functionality is being done by 10 lines of code, I need to copy paste that 10 lines of code to multiple places. But if we use functions, I can just create a function and put that 10 lines of code inside of that function. Then I can call the name of the function 10 times instead of copy pasting the functionality itself. Now the structure of functions are very much like variables as well. And to create a function, first we need to specify a type, then we will give it a name, let's say multiply, and after that we add 2 parentheses and 2 curly brackets. So the type that we specify for our function will be the type that the value will be going to return after the calculation is done. What I'm gonna say is that every time that we call the name of the function have to return something to us. It can be the value of the operation or simply just a boolean type true false. So we know that the operation got done without any error. So the red line that you can see below the name of my function, it means that we have a problem here. And if I hover my mouse on it, here you can see it is because we are not returning a value. So for now, just to get rid of the error, I'm just gonna say return 0. And that's how we can return a value. And let me tell you again, we can return anything that we want, but the type that we are returning and the type that we specified for our function should be the same. Another thing about return is it doesn't matter how many lines of code we have after the return. As soon as it hits return, it will get out of the function. So to use the function, it's very simple. We just call its name. Here's the difference between variables and function, because we have to put 2 parentheses at the end. So now this is our function being called. Right now our function is doing nothing, but it is returning some value to us. In this case it's 0, but 0 is a value as well. So let's just print it out. And we can do that by storing the returned value inside of another value, let's call it result, and put it equal to multiply. Or we can directly put the multiply inside the console.write line. Now if I run our application, the value of 0, you can see it is being printed out. Now let's say I want to pass some value to my function. So in order to pass some values to a function, first we need to specify the type of the values that we are going to pass. And let's say we're going to have an integer, let's call it a, and we need to have another integer, let's call it b. So outside of our function, the only thing that matters is the type, because the variables that we have created here are only accessible inside our function, and we cannot use a or b outside of the function. Now if I hover on the multiply name that we have called here you can see we have 2 parameters and we haven't passed any parameters. As you can see here, it says multiply does need 2 integers and it is required. Let's pass 2 and 5. So now let's use our variable. What we want to do, we want to create another variable called result and say result going to be equal to a multiplied by b. And here I want to return result. And here our function is very simple. So I can just say return the a multiplied by b. But not all of the function is going to be simple as that. And if we have a rather complicated function, it's always better to create a separate variable for the result so your code be more readable to other people. Now if we run our application, Here you can see the value of 10 being printed out inside my console. Now there is another type of function that we can create, which is called void functions. The void functions are an exception for when we do not need any returned value, and it is used very often. So let's say we have a music player application and we want to create a function for each functionality for our application. For example, going to the next music. So let's name this function simply next music, and I assume it does need a variable called current music. So we say, okay, this is the current music, and now you should go to the music after that. But the only difference between void functions and any other type is that it does not require a return, and it will be used when we don't need any return value. Another important thing to note is that it doesn't matter where we call our function. So as I told you, Csharp will run the codes from top to bottom. But as soon as we hit play and we run our application, the functions will be initialized inside our application, so it doesn't matter where we call them. It is going to work, and that's a very helpful feature. First, I want to tell you about the concept of objects and classes inside programming, and then we will dive into code and write our own classes and objects. In the real world, anything that you want to create has a blueprint. Let's say you want to build a house. When you look at the blueprint to build a house, you can understand what do you need to build a house, and it's in a structure to how to build it. In programming, classes are like blueprints. We can create objects from classes. Classes are just a blueprint, and objects are the things that we build from that blueprint. But since this is a digital world and we are not tied down to just physical stuff, we can create so many crazy things. For example, a blueprint to create a human. Also, objects in programming can have behavior. Our human has a bunch of parameters. For example, his height, the color of his eyes, his weight. And we can add behaviors, for example, for it to stand up or sit down or punch. These behaviors are methods that we have talked in the previous section. So now let's dive into code. Let's just start by creating a class called player. To create a class, just like methods, we can say public class and the name of the class, which in our case is player, then two curly brackets, and here is our class. Let's say that we want to create a game and we assume it is multiplayer. So inside a game, we have multiple players. The parameters for our player, which each player is gonna have, one of them is the name, which is just like the variables that we have created until now. We just say public string name, and we will set a getter and setter. The getter and setter can be used as a method. Right now, the functionality is the default that the C# will give us by creating a value. Any value that we put into it will go through set, and when we want to get it, it will go through get. Alright, to the next parameter, each of our player gonna have a public int health with a getter and setter, and also each of our player gonna have an int damage. I want my players to have an ability as well. It's gonna be a special ability. Each ability gonna be different from each other. But it doesn't hide the fact that each of them has an ability. Each ability has their own set of parameters and behaviors. So here is what we're gonna do. We're gonna create a variable called public ability, and let's just call it ability with a getter and setter. Now I can see the type of ability is not available. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna create another class, public class ability, and we have created a public class ability, and the ability now can have their own sets of parameters, their own behaviors, and don't get confused by creating the ability inside the player, because at the end of the day, what we are going to show the user is the calculation of some data. For example, when a player punches another player, we just calculate the distance between player 1 and player 2 is less than 1 meter, for example, and player 2 guard is not up, reduce the health of the player 2 by the amount of damage that the player 1 can have. So at the end of the day, all we do here are playing with data, so don't get confused by that. Now let's give our player a behavior. I want to create a public void punch. Let's open and close our parentheses and our curly brackets. Now each time our player throws a punch, I want to run a console.writeLine, and inside here I want to just say whoosh. Let's also create another behavior. Let's call it public void get punched, the parentheses and the curly brackets. Our get punch gonna get a value, which is an integer called damage. So when you get punched, I want to reduce the health. So we will say health gonna be minus equal the damage. And then let's console.write. Here you can see the autocomplete reading this for me, and I'm just gonna press tab. Let's add some text. Here I'm gonna say the name took this amount of damage and now have this amount of health. So this is how we can add a bunch of variables inside our text. We put a $sign before our double quotations for our string, and inside of it, any curly brackets that we open, we can put a value or we can write a code, and the result will be added inside our string. Now before we run and see the result, we need to first create a player. So to create a player, just like any variable, just like the ability that we have created, we're gonna say player and the name of the player, which let's just call it player1, gonna be equal to a new player. As I told you before, the player class here is a blueprint. So each time we're gonna create a new object of that blueprint, we're gonna say a new player. And when we say new player, our player will have a special space inside the memory of our computer. So the data that we have for player 1 and the data we have for player 2 will not get mixed up. Now, one way to give the parameter values to our player is by just saying player1.name. It can be John, and the player1.health can be 100, and it's one of the way that we can give value to our parameters. But the better way is by using a constructor. So let's go back into our class, and here if I write public player parentheses and curly brackets, you can see it's very much like a method, but it doesn't have a name, and the type also is the same as the type of our class. Well, it's because the constructor is basically a predefined method that each class can have. The purpose of the constructor is that when we create a new player, when we create an instance of the class that we have, the constructor will be run right away. So we do not need to call it like punch or get punched. And inside my constructor, what I want to do is to create a bunch of variables. So one of them is string name, the other one is int health, an int damage, and an ability called ability. It's because when I'm creating this player, I want to give all these values to my parameters. So now to actually give these values to our parameters, we need to say name is equal to name, which is a bit odd. The Csharp will know that this name is the one that we have created here, and this name is the one that we have created inside the constructor. But the better way is by saying this.name be equal to name. As you know, any variable that we create inside a method is only usable inside that method, and you cannot access it globally throughout our class. But when we say this.name, although the name of the variable is the same, the Csharp knows that it should go pick the variable that is inside the class. It's global. So now let's do this for other variables as well. This.health gonna be equal to health, this.damage gonna be equal to damage, and this.ability gonna be equal to ability. Now to give them the value that we want, here when we are creating an instance of the new player, we're just gonna give them the values inside the parentheses. So here I'm gonna say John and comma. Here you can see the values that it needs to create a new player, because these values are all required. But let's say that we want to give the ability of the user throughout the game, not at the start that the player has been created. You're gonna acquire that ability. So at the start, we can set the ability to nullable. If you put a question mark after the type of the variable, it will become nullable, so we can add null values to it. Now give the health 100, damage gonna be 10, and I can just set the ability to null. If I do not put the question mark here, when I say null, here you can see it is giving me a warning that cannot convert null to non-nullable reference type. So let's get that question mark back. And also in here, I should put the ability to nullable. Alright, now it's time to test. Let's say our player 1 has throw some punches. So we'll say player 1.punch, and just 2 more times. None of them hit another player, and the player 1.get punched. Alright, now the amount of damage that we have taken is 15. Maybe the level of that player in front of us is higher. Maybe the damage is higher and the health is lower. These are all the values that you can play with. Now if I run our application, alright, here you can see whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. And after that you can see John took 15 damage and now have 85% health. If you want to support me to create more videos like this, please consider liking this video so YouTube can suggest this video to other people as well. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.